All right. Let's go ahead and start with an introduction, first name, last name, and, you know, really what you're, I guess, most passionate about. You know what I mean? Like you had a lot of jobs, you've done a lot of stuff. So you can just give me a small gambit of what that is.
Most passionate about. That's a good one. But my name is Kevin Grogan, Grogan, and what I'm most passionate about. I got to be honest with you, man. The thing I'm probably most passionate about right now in my life is being a husband and a father, which is kind of a cool place to be considering where I've come from and the way I did that wrong in my younger years.
Yeah, man, being a husband and a father, I can relate with you on that one. A lot of what I have grown just over the years has been because of my wife and my kids. So I relate to that a lot. And that is probably the most important job we do have outside of all the rest of these titles.
I got to tell you, man, the years, my first wife, I didn't do the husband thing too well. When my son was a young kid, didn't do the father thing too well. But I just got remarried about 2.5 years ago. I do the husband thing 100%, 100 miles an hour. And my kid is now a United States Army Ranger. So the amount of pride that comes with that. But, we have a great relationship, especially given after the rough times we had earlier in life. So it's really good that we are aware, and which was entirely my fault and none of his. So
That's awesome, man. Having a kid in the military, what is that like? I don't know it obviously from my perspective, but I can imagine from my parents' perspective. But as a parent that has someone in the military, what's your feelings on that? Are you worried all the time? Are you proud and you're like, I'm not worried because I know that this, my kid can go out and do exactly what he needs to do, and I'm rather him than someone else? How do you feel about that?
delicate subject. All I can say is the amount of pride that I take in what he's accomplished in his career so far. He's been in, I think, 4 years now. But he's an amazing guy. He really very gritty kid. Knew exactly what he was wanted to do. Went in, got it. So he went the special operations route. Volunteered to be a ranger. Got into Ranger Battalion. Then recently graduated Ranger School and everything that goes in that. So to answer your question is my first thought was worry, with everything that's going on in, Gaza and all over the world, and I thought those guys are the tip of the spear. They're always the first ones in. They're always doing things that we don't hear about in the news. But then, having attended a few graduations of Ranger Assessment, Ranger School, weekends of these guys coming to the house, hanging out on the patio, he's surrounded by the best of the best. My confidence in what the United States Army does, specifically the 75th Ranger Regiment, is unparalleled. So I know, God forbid he ever have to go experience the things we'll probably talk about here shortly, he's surrounded by the guys that'll get him through, and I'm super confident in his ability that he'll get his guys through. So a lot of pride comes with that, man.
I bet, yeah. The Rangers. I haven't done a whole lot of work with the Rangers, but the small exposure I get from them when we do operations here in Virginia and SOCOM comes in, and so you get to see some of the equipment that they get exposed to and how they utilize that. It makes me feel like I don't know how to describe it, like almost like we are as the United States and our special military operations are at a different level than like even what the public knows. It's pretty cool to see.
Well, it's different than even I know. I was regular Army, military, police, that kind of stuff, and I knew there were Rangers. I knew there were Special Forces. I knew, you know about those things. You see it in TV. You see that the technology and those things super super cool. Wow to see that. But what blows me away is the determination of the individuals that serve in those units. It's unbelievable. They're incredible young men, and the few women that are there, they dedicate themselves to a way of life, and I have nothing but admiration for all of them. It's really unbelievable the tempo that those guys and girls bring, but the skill set. I mean, you add determination to incredible training and well equipped, and it's an unstoppable force.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch that. I'm glad to know that, the pride is the biggest emotion you're feeling, so that's really cool.
For sure. And I'm mildly patriotic, so it's a
Mildly,
big
to
thing.
put it. Yes, me as well. Yes. All right. So tell me, you became a police officer. All right, so you have your military background, right? So you're Army, you said MP, right? So did the military police, and you did that prior to going into the local law enforcement?
Man, my whole story is crazy. So I always knew I was going to be a cop. Knew it. My uncle retired as a deputy chief of police in Springfield, Massachusetts. But growing up, he was, always in the newspaper. He was a top narcotics guy. He was a top homicide guy. Went up the chain. Just always a hero of mine. So I always knew what I wanted to do. From 1981, you maybe not remember, but when President Reagan got shot, that was when I knew, I needed to do something to keep the world safe in my own little way. So I always knew law enforcement was it. So I went to Westfield State College in Massachusetts, often referred to as the Harvard of Western Massachusetts. Majored in criminal justice and minored in political science. And right out of college, I got hired as a police officer in my hometown, which was really cool. Windsor, Connecticut, the first town established in 1633. But, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My dad coached the Little League. I was just coming out of college. Didn't necessarily have the maturity to be a police officer yet. And then you add to the fact that everywhere, before I was even out of the academy, people, guys on the department would make a traffic stop and they'd be like, I know Grogan, I know Grogan. They're like, we don't give a shit. He's who the hell, whatever. So it was a little uncomfortable at the time, but I was kind of forced to realize I needed to broaden my horizons. So I joined the gang, commonly referred to as the United States Army. And they shipped me off to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And very shortly after basic, I went to Heidelberg, Germany. So got, as a 23-year-old single male, got to hang out in Heidelberg, smack dab in the middle of Europe. That was a good time. I wound up deploying to Kosovo, which was also super cool because as a political science, I had studied, you're talking mid 90s. So the breakup of Yugoslavia was the biggest thing in the world. And then my first assignment in the Army, my first real assignment, was going to Kosovo to see boots on the ground of what I'd been studying. So that was a really cool thing. And as you and I were talking about before we got going here, 2001, somebody flew a plane into the World Trade Center, and it kind of changed the peacetime Army into 20 years of war. So I immediately, and the position I was in was phenomenal. I was a protective service agent for the commanding general of the United States Army, Europe. So 4-star general in Europe, and you're right there. I was right there in the thick of it when Tora Bora happened and all that kind of stuff. We were sitting there at the USER headquarters. So I got to see a lot about strategy, got to see a lot about leadership. I worked for one of the greatest leaders in the history of the United States Army. His great uncle was the first quartermaster general of the Army for Montgomery Cunningham Meigs. So if you ever go to Arlington National Cemetery, you will drive right up Meigs Avenue, which is the main artery through the thing. And the first general, or the first Montgomery Cunningham Meigs is buried there. And my boss and hero and mentor, Montgomery C. Meigs, is also there in Arlington now, unfortunately. But I got a real good look at leadership while I was in the Army. Left Germany, got to Fort Stewart, Georgia, and was in Baghdad very shortly thereafter. So, I got to see that. Got out shortly, right when we got back. So I got home March 11th, 2004, and I graduated the Georgia Southeast Regional Police Academy on March 11th, 2005. So 1 year from the time I was wheels down, I was graduating the police academy and went to work for the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department. And man, it was a hell of a ride, for sure.
Is it the state of Georgia? Do they do police academies like in Virginia? The police department hires you, and then you go through either a regional academy or you go through their police academy. But I know that some states have where it's like you almost like just go to an academy and now you're just certified to get hired by anyone. Is that how it kind of works in Georgia?
Yeah, Georgia works at you can get hired, or you can go what they used to call pre-service. So you go in, you can go to the academy, get yourself certified, but you need to be hired and once you go through all the process with an agency. But obviously you're much more desirable to an agency to take a chance on because they don't have to pay to train you. I got hired by, like I said, it was a merging police department. Chatham County and the city of Savannah were merging at the time. I was the first class of the merged department, and then very shortly after I left unceremoniously from the department, they demerged. So I like to think I was the glue that held the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department together. A lot of people would disagree with that, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But no, I mean, Savannah is one of the most beautiful cities in the country. It's very touristy, but it's very alive. I've said it 1,000 times. I call it the Boston of the South. So much history here, but man, oh man, if you wanna do some police work, run and gun, and do all this fun stuff you see in movies, Savannah, Georgia is the place to do it.
Yeah. We went to Savannah last year. I think we were talking about that the other day on the phone, and what a beautiful, really the whole place is beautiful. My wife, Heather, she loves graveyards, and we went to a graveyard in Savannah, and it was almost like you see in the movies, like the trees had the moss flowing down from it. What Tell me about the graveyards while I'm on the subject, and what significance that is in Georgia or Savannah.
Well, Bonaventure Cemetery, there was a huge book written. It was called The Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Then they made a movie of it. Clint Eastwood directed it. So it was a huge thing. It was about a murder in Savannah and all that. But it was based, a lot of it kind of swirled around Bonaventure Cemetery, which is just beautiful. I mean, historic. You got people who've been buried there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And again, you add the scenery to it. And if you walk all the way through the cemetery, you go into a marsh, which people come to see. It's just unbelievably beautiful, even given the fact that it's a cemetery. But the old, they spared no expense on the tombstones and that kind of stuff. So it's absolutely breathtaking. But then you come into the center of the historic district, and there's another cemetery that's right there. So there's Savannah loves death, celebrating it, and committing murders to speed it up. They're not too shy about that either.
Oh man. Yeah, it was I loved it there. You get to go just the city. I mean, really I've been to a lot of cities. Boston is probably one of my favorite cities to visit, but Savannah, it was so historic, like with the food, and when you go down by the river and just the people, and there was so much art there, like in different expressions of either music art or paintings or all of these performers on the street, and then just the culture and how nice people are down there. And obviously during the day in the tourist area, I'm sure is much different than what you were seeing as a police officer
I
working.
see. That's a funny thing for people to say. The thing is, that's what I love and admire about the quote unquote bad guys in Savannah. They're daytime, nighttime, they're equal opportunity. They're not shy about getting down during the day. They're less shy about getting down at night. But Savannah, downtown Savannah is a great vibe. And I've said this a bunch of times too. The thing is, I knew in 3 hours of coming to Savannah that I'd never leave. Then I wrote 2 books about her, and they asked me to leave a lot, but I'm kind of stubborn. I stick around.
I like it. Yeah. All right. So you get out of the army, and is it because you got out of the army in Georgia? You were like, I'm just gonna pop up here.
Yeah, my ex-wife was born and raised in Savannah, so I got here, and like I said, I was here, and the tempo of this place is great. Nobody's in a hurry. I stood in the bank line and made 15 of my new best friends instantly, people I'd never met. We just stood there and talked, and I've always been kind of an outgoing person. So I was just like, man, the tempo, this is really nice. You don't meet strangers down here. It's just a beautiful city, and it was convenient. It was one of those things where the job lined up just as I was getting out. The county and the city were merging, so it was an interesting opportunity, and I knew there was a lot of opportunity here. And when I got going, man, I was blessed. My law enforcement career here in Savannah it was charmed. Every opportunity just fell in my lap, and I was able to do, and leadership. I wound up being blessed by working for great leaders. So.
Yes. Yeah. That does play a lot into kind of where I mean, honestly, I could say like the trajectory of my career, and I think for really anybody, if you get paired up with someone who you look up to and you can mimic their good behaviors but put your own spin and your own personality, it really does, it pushes you to be better. And I think that does have a good quality for it, especially in law enforcement because it goes from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. And so having that grit, as you like to say, and pushing through those lows is really where it's at.
No, and when you got the guys around it that, you watch when you go out and your sergeant is, you get out onto your shift and your sergeant beats you to your beat and makes an arrest, it makes you look bad. It makes you want to go out there and work a little harder. And I worked for a guy named Armando Tamargo, ugly little fella, but hell of a cop. Really taught me a lot about how to go out and get it and how to police a beat. Talking to people, working. They have all these trainings, and after 2014 and the Ferguson, what I call the Ferguson effect, after that started, they're talking about, oh, we need all this training. We had that long before there was ever a class on it. You just went out, you deal with people, you learn how to deal with people, you learn how to talk to people, and everything else works itself out.
One of the things that I learned when I was in patrol was that we police, like when we worked, I worked in a city where it would touch the country, but it also touched the city. So it's like a little bit of everything. And you respond to different calls in different areas, and people want you to enforce the law differently. But you knew that because you're always out there talking with people. You're out with your, business owners, you're out with the people, and you stop out and talk with them. So really learning how to patrol a beat is very important.
The techniques and stuff like that are important, but anybody who's ever worked law enforcement knows it. Pardon me. Anybody who's ever been good at law enforcement knows it's all about how you talk to people. It's knowing, when to put the hammer down or when to, pick people up. It's always been and always will be about communication in your community. And if you don't care about the area, if you don't care about where you work, you don't belong in the business.
Correct. Yeah. How long did you stay on patrol? So you go and you start in Savannah. How does your career go? So what did you do and where did you end up at?
Like I said, man, it's the most charmed career you would ever hear about. So I got here. I went to the academy on FTO for whatever it was, 16 weeks, 16, 18 weeks, whatever it was back then. I'm sure it's much more now. And for 4 months, I was cut loose. Okay, 4 months cut loose. I was assigned a beat in one of the rougher housing projects in Savannah on the east side. It's called Hitch Village. I renamed it Groganistan because I'm territorial. But I was out there for about 4 months, and then a special task force, specialized unit called the Expanded Patrol Operation, which was a county-wide, highly aggressive crime suppression unit. And in four months, I had built up enough of a reputation, just timing when it happened, and I got pulled over to that unit. So I did that for about 11 months. And man, oh man, that was eye-opening. That was where I really learned how to police. It was all about guns and drugs and all that kind of stuff. But for me, my whole focus in my whole career, even from patrol early on, was all about the violence. It was all about getting guns. I loved getting dope as much, if not more, than anybody else. But what I was after was the guns. So after that, I went back on patrol for like another 2 months, and then I got pulled over onto an organized crime drug enforcement task force they call OCDF with the ATF, and it was a gang prosecution that was going on. 3 gangs were tearing up the city, and it just so happened that the projects that I worked in were one of the focal points of that investigation, and I knew everybody. I knew who, what, baby's mama, what location, if this is where he lives, but this is where he lays his head, and I had that type of stuff just from having been shown how to work a beat. So that intelligence opened that door for me. I actually left Savannah, the Savannah Police Department. We got a new chief. I didn't like a lot of the politics that were going on, but who does? We have a county narcotics team that at that time, I can't speak to it now, but at that time I can tell you the way they did business and always did business when I saw them was bad business, and I wanted nothing to do with that. So my ATF buddies that I had worked on the OCDF case with introduced me to a guy out in Liberty and Long County. It was a multi-jurisdictional drug task force. So I went out there and worked for 3 years. And then my old chief got named, he was the interim chief when I was first there, and then he got named the actual chief about 3 years later. So when he came back in, I went back to Savannah. I was back in Savannah for 2 months, and we started up another OCDF case. It was another gang case, so I did that for about 2 years, and then got bumped up into homicide. Was working homicide for about 2 years, drank myself out of there and got myself in trouble, got myself in some big trouble, and there ended the law enforcement career. But leading up to the downfall, I saw a lot.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm sure that you have a lot that's going on. Were you a TFO with ATF?
No, and that was the thing, I worked with them just got assigned to the task force for the first gang case. When I went out to Liberty and Long County, the Mace Drug Task Force, we started up another OCDF case. They were doing, I don't know if you've ever seen any of the storefront operations, but a good buddy of mine wrote a book about it. It's called Storefront Sting. Retired ATF agent Lou Velozzi, who actually his show Operation Undercover is on the ID channel now. But he was the ATF's expert on storefront. So I worked that with them while I was doing that in the cover room of the storefront. I was working with the FBI and the DEA on a gang that we had in Liberty and Long County. So it was another OCDF case that got started up. So, I was just in and out, always in that office. You would have thought I was a TFO. I was treated with unbelievably well. Again, it was just, a very charmed existence. Not a lot of guys got the opportunities that I got. And, everybody's like, oh, he's always saying what a great cop he was. It's not that I was a great cop. I just had great opportunities. And it was one of those things where you give me the opportunity. You can open up the door. As soon as you do, I'm kicking through it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, that is something that a lot of people should do. When you get the opportunity like that, you got to run with that.
Oh yeah, man. When the big dogs call you out to play, you better show you got it,
Yes, most certainly. Yeah. I do a lot of work with Homeland Security and FBI and the ATF now, and it's really cool to see when multi-jurisdictional and multi-agencies come together and actually work as a team. And the hardest thing with any law enforcement is just intelligence and sharing intelligence with one another. We all live in a silo for whatever reason. But
as soon as you can put that ego aside and not worry about who gets credit for the work, just go out and do the work, which you and I both know does not happen often. It doesn't happen often. And the thing is, like I said, there were so many guys in it. Very atypical career that I had, because I would come with an idea or a strategy and they'd just get out of my way and let me do it. And that, that doesn't happen for a lot of people. So I will never forget to, I point it out as often as I can, how lucky I was and how blessed I was to work with guys that, they're the best at what they do and they're not afraid to let you do what you do. So that's a good place to be for me.
Yes, absolutely. What kind of stuff were you doing in homicide, in the sense of did you get assigned a specific area for homicide, or was it, here we have a midnight cruiser. So the midnight detectives would get assigned the case if they were homicide working that night. Is it something like that, or is it you took homicide specifically for certain parts of Savannah?
No, we did 2 teams. So you had 2 teams. You were on call a week, off call the next week, and it would rotate. So at the time, I think we had 8 detectives in the office. On a good day, we had 8 detectives. And the thing is, it would rotate. So if I caught a primary, the next one, if another one happened that night, it would be you if you were the next up. And we would rotate until it goes. And Savannah they average probably about, when it was the city and the county merged, we would get between 30 and 35 homicides a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a city this size, it's a bunch. And I say this one 1,000 times too. If it weren't for the trauma center at our hospital, Memorial Health Center, if it weren't for their trauma center, we'd have so many more homicides than that, because we have a ton of shootings.
Yes. It's interesting you bring that up. Me and Heather talk about this, and she brought this up at one point in time recently. You have a lot of shootings right now, right? And regardless of what jurisdiction you're in, the shootings have just been more prevalent than normal. And because of the work of the healthcare workers and the doctors that have advanced so much with life-saving measures, it almost affects the court, because you didn't kill someone even though you tried to. And because medical personnel were able to save that life, your charge gets dropped down. You know what I mean? And there's a conundrum there, I feel, right? Like your intent and your actions would have killed this person if medical personnel had not advanced so much to where they can save your life right now.
No, if we treated aggravated assaults as what we call it in Georgia, if you treat aggravated assaults the same way you treat murder, you know, instead of the autopsy, you look at the medical facts of, this, okay, it hit him here, no big deal. But when you shot this person, you nicked an artery. So it took massive amounts to save this person's life. And it's not because you didn't intend to kill them. It's just because, the quality of medical care that the person received by the grace of God, they're still here. Your actions were no less despicable, but everything to me is and always will be a case by case basis. I've known a lot of people that got shot, and they got shot because they asked for it. I know a lot of people that got shot because they, were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it just goes so many ways. And I think, unfortunately, the failure of the American criminal justice system, which is, obviously the answer and the reason for it is volume, but we've developed a conveyor belt. This is just how we deal with it. Okay, that one that it falls into this slot. Oh, that goes into the slot. Like, unless it's your life, unless it's your loved ones and that kind of stuff, you look at it entirely different. So, I have been listening to a lot of your podcasts in the last couple of days, like we talked about. And the thing is, it's so emotional. We can go through and talk about it, and you get so used to it. You see so much in your career. Firefighters see it, nurses, doctors, they all see it. Cops definitely see it, soldiers see it. But the thing is, it's the most critical incident in some people's lives. It's just another traffic accident to me because I've ridden 30 of them today. But that's person's the first accident they've ever been, and I don't care if anybody's hurt or not. It's the most shocking and shaking event they've ever had in their life, depending on where they come from. And I think it's important to remind people to never lose sight of that. New police officers, never lose sight of the incident you're dealing with. While it's not that big of a deal to you, could be everything to that person that you're dealing with.
Most certainly. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's, you know, in law enforcement, you see people on their worst days. And, to us, it's just another call. And no, yeah, it is. It's different. And, sometimes it gets to you, some of the calls, especially, when I was dealing with children or, domestic situations, it's not that they don't get to you. It's that, obviously you have to be professional and you have to put it on your face and you're doing what you need to do to get it done. But, you step away from that, you get back in the car and, you get your next call of a dog's lost, you know what I mean? And you just were at this critical incident. So law enforcement, they have to flip this switch really fast. And it does take a minute to really like hone that in and to find your bearings of like, okay, I know I just saw this. I got to process this. I took care of the situation. Let me move on to the next one. But at the end of the day, these officers, they need to really find that outlet to take care of themselves.
No, and the people skills that it involves, the thing that has driven me nuts for the last decade is the amount of shit that police officers take. I really, it's one of those things, man, where it's not the critic that counts. That's become a very popular reference to Teddy Roosevelt, but the thing is, it's not. You got your brothers and your sisters, and you're out there to do the job, and 99.9%, and that's not an actual statistic, of the people that are out in law enforcement are out there to try to do some good, and the amount of criticism that people feel very comfortable giving, my only message to them is pick up your badge, pick up your gun, you go out and do it for a little while and see how critical of these men and women you are, because it's an unbelievably difficult job, and you got to be a special person to do it. It's just like, being a nurse or firefighters, especially. I love making fun of firefighters, but I'm scared of fire. I'm not doing it. I'm not built that way.
Yeah, 100%. And, I have to include one of my friends, Brandon Hall. He is a dispatcher, and I had him on, and just listening to him, right? I've dispatchers, I've been around them for a very long time, but when he was talking about talking over the phone to people that are in burning buildings and the person outside just lit their house on fire. And I'm like, yo, what do you do? Like, I want to get in my car and like go help. And he's like, I have to, I got to make sure that they're calm. I got to make sure that, do you send them out to where the person's catching the house on fire to that person, or do you let them sit in the house while it's on fire? So there's a whole different side of dispatch that I'm going to give a whole lot of credit to, because they have to listen to people die on the phone, critical things that they have, and go to the next call like we do.
How many times do they hear the last thing somebody says? So my wife, she was a supervisor of dispatch down in Lee County, Florida, so the Fort Myers area, and we talk about that. We've actually talked about writing a book together, kind of about the relationship between officers and dispatch. So when I refer to law enforcement, I lump them into those poor bastards, because they having to put up with the crap that me and my buddies put them through on a nightly basis. But the amount of care and the attention to detail and the emotion that they go through, I'm chasing a guy out in the backyard and they're hearing it and they're going, and then they're calling for me and I'm fighting with the guy and they're not getting any feedback. They're not hearing anything. What they go through during that time is every bit as emotional, every bit as strenuous, every bit as, debilitating to them as it is to anybody out in the field actually doing it. It's like a parent who can't get to your kid when they're having a problem. It's no different. And the relationship that I've had with dispatchers and communications over the years has been, they're an irreplaceable part of the job, and law enforcement doesn't get done without them.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. So thank you, dispatchers. We greatly appreciate that and recognize how intense it is.
Dorothy Cave. Anytime I talk about a dispatcher, I used to drive that woman nuts, but she always kept tabs on me and got the people I needed to me as fast as she could.
That's awesome. Yes. All right. So tell me about what's going on in Savannah when you're there. Like what kind of things are happening in that area? Because again, beautiful place, but what we see on TV is like the nice parts of it. I mean, Forrest Gump, right? So we go down there and watch the feather fall, but what happens at night? What happens during the day?
Well, our biggest problem is the same problem. Wherever you got people, you got problems. Wherever you got people, you got drugs. Savannah is it's a drinking town. So you have all the problems associated with that. But our whole drug trade is controlled by gangs. For a long time, Savannah wouldn't admit that, but the cat's been out of the bag so long. So the drug trade controlled by gangs, you get all the violence associated with that, and it's bad. It's been a long time. So early 90s, there was a famous gang here. It was the Ricky Jivens gang, and their initiation was you drove around, and to get into the gang, you had to kill people. He wound up getting caught, but his nephews, his cousins, and brothers and sisters, they're still in the city. So, I've worked with members of all the associates' families for years and years. The funny thing is now one of the things I do is I do some private investigations and consultations for defense attorneys. So I've been working with a lot of people who would not, and I'll add the caveat of guys that I put in prison for guns, drugs, gangs, all that kind of stuff. They're now getting out, and I've been able to reach out, and they've reached out to me. So we've been able to have some pretty adult conversations about what could I have done differently to try to prevent you from, trying to work on some of these solutions. And man, I've gotten an earful. I've learned a whole lot. I used to think I was right about everything. Now I know I was not right, not correct about too many things, for sure. But the thing is, you got to go out there and do your best job for the right reasons. So Savannah, the gangs, the drugs, and the violence that's associated with it. It's not unlike any other city, but man, it's pronounced. It really is pronounced. Savannah, unfortunately, is a very violent city. We don't solve problems with the discussions. We solve them with bullets.
Wow. Yeah. It's like any other city, I would imagine. When I think about what crimes happen, right? So a lot of times, a lot of jurisdictions, depending on where they're at, it is always associated with either gangs, drugs, or violent crime. And it's usually from a group or a gang or something like that. And especially being in the 90s when you were working there and then the 2000s, there was an uptick in drugs as they evolved, right? So, the crack epidemic happened, and a lot of people started getting associated with that. When you're working with the ATF, the FBI, and doing these fronts and all that, what connections did you see with how they're getting the drugs and how that was different than like how we might see it now?
Small caveat: I tried never to work with the FBI. Not then, not now, not ever. But that's the FBI is the F word to me. I respect what those guys do. I just like to bust their chops a bit. But the connection is it's always poverty, lack of opportunity. All the things that we talk about. And I've watched politicians fumble over it so many times. And oh well, we need to find the root cause is we don't take care of our kids. We don't educate them. I drive by Savannah High School and Jenkins High School and Beach High School, and there's no books in there. The computers are old. All of these things that we've been very negligent on the education part of it. But the football field and the track outside of the school are $1 million facilities. I was a sports fan forever, man. I really love sports, but how many people go through their high school career, go to Division I college and play professional football, baseball, soccer, whatever? That you can't shoot for that small minority. You have to shoot for the all of them, and it's educating our kids so they can develop skills and which creates jobs, etc. But that's where it all comes from. Hopelessness, poverty, and if you've got nothing to lose, what's a little violence?
That's true. Yeah. I would assume that's how it is really everywhere. It is,
I'd say it's universal.
yeah. Yeah. I think no matter where you go, you'd see that. And it really is unfortunate. And I don't know, I don't know how politicians will solve that problem, but I don't know what the correct answer is to tell you the truth.
I think it's us. I think it's communication. I think it's honesty. You can't solve a problem unless you're honest about what it is. So race has been the huge thing that everybody wants to talk about. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's again, communicating with your fellow humans. People talking to each other and working out what the problems, and there are, I say it's always this problem, but it's not it. I mean, every area in the country has their own unique problems in that, and I don't mean to be insensitive to that, but overall the answer is education, communication, and simply giving a shit. Care about your fellow man, and I think we've lost a lot of that in my lifetime anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Matter of fact, there was what I wanted to talk about was the difference you see from military and law enforcement. Where you've gone through two different hats, and we always see military. There's this epidemic and this stigma about PT, and we know that obviously people in the military see a lot, they do a lot, and they're doing things OCONUS right in other countries, and then you've done that, but you've also done it on the streets of America. What to you is the best thing that you can what's the best way that you can describe what the difference is and how people who are just police officers here in the States, they're like, oh, I didn't fight in a war, but I still feel this way.
I think I got to say unequivocally there is no difference. Yeah, obviously there are different nuances depending on go, but trauma is trauma. If you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I'd have laughed at you. I'd have been like, man, suck it up, get tough, deal with what you got to deal with. We're men. You go through that. Some trauma unaddressed from my time in Baghdad. They say it's a 10-year cycle, and it got me right at 10 years. I didn't deal with it. It came back and bit me in the ass. I've seen so many brothers and sisters deal with it or not deal with it and seen the negative effects of it. But the thing is, whether you're in the mountains of Afghanistan or grinding the sand in Iraq or toiling it out on the streets of, Baltimore, it's not different. When bullets are flying, they're flying. When you see the catastrophic results of violence, which happens in combat OCONUS or, here in our own cities, when you see that, it's going to have a physiological effect on you. One of my best friends, one of the best cops I ever worked with in Savannah, he's up in Chicago now. I won't use his name because it just, I would never want to embarrass anybody about something that there's no need to be embarrassed about. But he talked to me. He's like, man, I've never been in combat. I'm like, bullshit, you haven't. I've been in combat with you in the, on the streets of Savannah. It's no different, but for whatever reason, we get in our mind that combat in a war is different than combat in the street, and it's not, man. Trauma is trauma, and that is not only police officers, but think about the populace that we police. Imagine growing up in a housing project that's drug infested in Savannah, Georgia, or Boston, Massachusetts, or Chicago, Illinois, wherever your thing is, and you see the violence at that level, you're equally as traumatized as any soldier or police officer or first responder, and the thing is, when does that ever get dealt with? You know what? It doesn't get dealt with most of the times until people are incarcerated and go, oh shit, if ever, if the people pull through and survive that, and so I say all that to say, really, to me, there is no difference. It's the same thing. And I don't mean to be dismissive of people's individual experiences, because I would never do that. But what I'm saying is, all of those experiences collectively, they're the same, and they need to be dealt with.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you broke it down like that. It is an overlooked point, right? The people who live in these communities are exposed to some of the worst, like violence, drugs, and that's their home. Like I don't know what that's like. So that trauma has to be on a completely different level. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's,
Man, I work with a young man that has been through so much shit, not only in his lifetime, and I'm talking his whole life, but in a 3-year span, he was within 2 feet of 3 murders. The person next to him being killed. I mean, how do you pull your bootstraps up there and just say, "Oh no, man, I'm good. I'm tough, so I can just deal with that." It doesn't work that way, man. And I don't care. He's got all the street credibility in the world, but to me, all I think about is, dude, how are we going to get you some help for this? And that's just because I'm an old man now, and I have been down that hole. I've let myself fall apart. I've seen people. Yeah, I've seen so much suicide. It's unbelievable, which is incredibly common in law enforcement and military circles. And, you know, don't think it's any different in the street. The people that go through the trauma out in their communities, it's the same answer. I don't know statistically if suicide's on the rise, but I have a strong suspicion that there's a lot more suicide now than there ever was, maybe since Depression times.
yeah, yeah, it truly is. And, to your point, I know that there's different levels that people experience, right? So, the way that our brain interprets that we see or involve with is going to be on a different level than other people's, right? So it doesn't take away and doesn't make it worse or better or any different. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about. It needs to have a clear guidance on, if you need help, these are the options, or find an option that will work. But, making sure that those are available to everyone, the community, law enforcement, military, first responders. And I mean, honestly, like, you see these people also, like, car accidents. We went to a lot of car accidents, and you imagine driving by that as it happened, and watching someone get half thrown out of a car and run over. I mean, all these things happen, and I don't know that we ever talk about it in the sense of, hey, this crazy thing happened once, and it's now a talking point in a conversation versus, that's crazy. That is now a memory in my head.
No, and the thing is, there's so much that goes into that, and we could talk about this for hours. The thing is, your life experience has a lot going into, because if something like, if I saw a kid get hit by a bike right now, yeah, okay, it's something we got to deal with, and I walk through that, and I'm going to feel bad for that kid. But for somebody who has never been, had a traumatic experience like that in their life, that is a life altering event. And the thing is, I can't look down my nose at that person and think that it's life. Come on, man. It's just a kid getting hit by a bike. I mean, shit. Yeah, you can't be so desensitized to it. And, given that your audience, I'm assuming, is law enforcement, first responders, and anybody who's interested in like a true crime thing, my only advice to any and all of you is don't downplay it. Get some help. And I'm not saying cry about everything, and, don't go so far off the deep end where you let it ruin every second of your life, because I've seen that happen too. The whole woe is me thing. But don't treat it like it's not important, because it is. And, even talking about it, sometimes going, the most cathartic thing I ever did was write stuff down. When I started writing things down to, not even journaling, just writing it out, I learned so much about how I actually felt, like the things I pushed down and what didn't want to think about in that moment. When I started writing about one incident, I remembered another incident, and I remembered something else, and I remembered something else, and it led. But getting that out, just the expelling it from inside, was so cathartic for me. It was so good. It helped me get through, a lot of things. So.
Well, as we're talking about trauma, there's an incident that happened earlier this week. It was actually at the end of last week where, near where I'm at, two Virginia officers down in Virginia Beach were killed. And those officers' names were Cameron Gervin and Christopher Reese at Virginia Beach Police. And it's a horrific story, right? The small amount that I do know about it is the officers were making a traffic stop. They were riding two to a car. I'm not sure if they do that in Savannah. In my jurisdiction, we didn't do that, but I can imagine in bigger ones they do that. They were riding two to a car that night, and they made a traffic stop for expired registration, from what I've read, and asked the guy to get out of the car. He refused to get out of the car. Eventually, he did get out of the car. A small struggle ensued. The two officers were then shot, and before the suspect left the scene, essentially he walked up to them and then left the scene and killed himself in a shed. And so to hear those things, right? We hear and see on the news officers get shot and killed. Even that same day, another officer was killed up in Pennsylvania, where nurses were zip tied and there was a hostage situation, and he got into a shootout and was killed that same day. And it almost it almost seems like it's just another news story. When you read about these people, these officers and the children and their families, and we do the same thing for victims of crimes, with murders and homicides and being at the wrong place at the wrong time. It is it is something, as we consume information, we don't want to think about too much because it is emotional, right? You in law enforcement or military or whatever profession, it hurts a little bit more because it's the uniform, right? We wear the same, do the same things, and processing that, it hurts. And
No, I got a buddy that works for the Virginia Beach Police Department. Name's Lieutenant Bill Chisholm, who's up there, and my heart goes out to not only Lieutenant Chisholm but the entire police department. You think about the wives, family members, and children that have lost their loved ones, but then professionals there at the Virginia Beach Police Department that have to go out and go back to work immediately. There's no time off. There's no anything. They have to get right back out in those streets and do their job ethically, professionally, and those guys, they pull their boots on every day, and they're going to go out and do it. They've done it since the incident. I'm confident they're going to continue to do so. It's just that's a tragedy on a scale that it's difficult to understand. But my is off, and my heart goes out to their police department, the community of Virginia Beach, and everybody in the neighborhood. How often do you rub elbows with guys in the department next to you? So my heart goes out to all of you. Just keep doing what you do. You raise your hand to do it. Don't let of one guy affect how
yeah,
you do it.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, before we get out of here, I do want to know what you're working on, what you have worked on. I know you got some books, and you've been on a couple of. You turned a book into a screenplay. Is that correct?
Couple of them. Yeah. Yeah. Hollywood is a whole different business, man. So I've been working at it for years. So I got two books out. One is called Black Sheep, White Cop, Savannah Exposed. It's basically a memoir of my career. Uh, and then the second one is Ruffian, which is it's one of the OSIDF cases that I talked about. It was very oriented investigation, working with gangs and guns and all that stuff. So I've turned both of those into screenplays. I'm working with a young man. He's a local Savannah rapper. Fantastic musician and kid. He's in a little bit of trouble now. Just his past has crept up with him, but he signed on to the projects. Is Taekwon Bowman is his name. Quando Rondo is his tag. Google, click, and listen to as much music as you can. It's a little rough, but he and I have collaborated to get, because these stories are about the street, and you got to do it from both ends. You do it from the cop side. You got to do it from the other side. And I have had really good talks about how to the issues you and I have been talking about. So you got to see it from sides. And keeping with that, I'm working on another covers my time in Homicide, which is you want to talk about feeling coming out, man. So many things associated with thought of. I just pushed it down while I was working, and now that I'm writing it down, it's coming out now, and I'm like, whoa, man, there's a lot there. So it's been a fun process. It always is. If I had known that writing books and trying to make them was going to be this much work, I never would have started. But I'm going to finish it just because that's just what I do.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, talking to us about what it's like working in Savannah, being in Savannah, doing the Army thing, and it's awesome to see your perspective, because your perspective is what really should be driving law enforcement as policing is going out in the community and being with them. I think that's the most important when you're talking about and communicating with them and doing doing what is right for them. I think that is something that we'll take with us.
And it all comes down to the golden rule. And one of the things is his name was Lieutenant David Oakes. I think he was with the New Britain, Connecticut Department. But Lieutenant Oakes, when I was in the police academy back in 1998, his message was, he's like, treat everybody like you would want grandmother treated when you stop them. And that doesn't exclude the bad guys. You got to talk to them. Not all bad guys are bad. Not all good guys are good. You got to treat people like you would want. And there's no training class for that, I don't think. I think it's how you're brought up. It's where you're from. It's that, if you're a person that actually cares about people, then law enforcement is the greatest opportunity in the world to affect change for other people. If you want to do some good in the world, there's no better way to do it, because, man, oh man, do you have a lot of influence on what happens in people's lives. And I think that's been spun since, it's always been around, but it really got highlighted in 2000, Ferguson, Missouri, and on and on and on and on. But never lose sight of the fact that if you're going to go out there, do a good job, do right by people, and you'll never go wrong with that. And your ability to do something positive in your community and communities it's limitless.
Yes, very wise. I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you for coming on. And I hope that we get to reconnect again and see where you're at in a little while.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me. And like I said, just one more shout out to the Virginia Beach Police Department. Guys, keep doing your job. Keep doing it. And, never be afraid to reach out, because people are always ears and shoulders. And, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.
Yes, we're always here for you. Thanks, brother.
All right, my friend. Thank you very much.